Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is our last meeting, which is, well, for me, kind of conflicting because I'm going to miss the class very much. It's been very interesting and I've learned a great deal from you. But obviously, it's nice to have one in the books and to be done with this semester. Some of you are graduating, in which case I congratulate you, but all of you have worked very hard and we've learned a great deal here. We've had so many great discussions. I think this has been one of my best classes, and I really thank you for being a part of it, for coming to class every day, being so engaged. So I'll be sad to leave, but it's also been very satisfying to be a part of it. So, naturally, because it is the end of the semester and we have the final exam on, I'm almost positive it's May 12th, and I'm going to just double check so I don't tell you the wrong. Yes, it's May 12th from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. And so it's coming up in about, 5 days, and you should begin studying pretty soon. And to that end, I've prepared a study guide that, as always, will guide you and give you a clear sense of what to prepare for. And my promise has always been from day one that if you prepare and you complete the study guide and you thoroughly review the reading that you have already read, of course, because it was assigned, you'll be in a good position to do well on the exam. And there are no surprises here. These kinds of study guides are illegal in some states, and it really is something to bargain for. So today we're going to discuss the study guide and we'll talk about the exam and we'll talk about how you can prepare for the exam. And I want you to ask any questions that you may have, and then I may have some questions for you. And I thought the best way to do this would be to kind of, sort of bounce questions off each other. And if you have a question, I'd like to see if we can draw a response from someone in the crowd, maybe share some ideas, generate some discussion. I may even ask you how you understand a particular topic or question that I've posed in the study guide. I think that the best way for you to prepare for the exam is to complete the review guide, but then also to review the reading closely. And the reason is because, um, well, I think that the area for improvement, without a doubt, is the multiple choice and true false around the assigned reading. What we saw on the midterm is that students struggled the most with that component of the exam. And the midterm is always a challenge because it's the first exam. It always is the case that there's some residual learning. And so now going into the final, you know what to expect. And you know that generally speaking, the reading will be drawn on by asking questions like, the general argument or the main hypothesis or something really big, right? The stuff that would appear on a map or in like the back of an atlas. Maybe not even in the back, maybe like in the feature on the map itself. And so you don't put everything on a map, you just put the big stuff. And as always, the questions on the multiple choice will really focus on those big items, the things that would probably appear in your notes if you kept a reading log, as I suggested at the start of the semester, and the kinds of items that really are independent of the way the article is written. I won't be asking, for example, for a detail on page 29 in paragraph 3. It's going to be much, much more general. It'll be something that is just objectively true, a fact about the article or the argument or the way that we engaged with it in the class. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share the review guide with you in the chat. So give me just a moment here. All right, everybody, I've shared the review guide and I want you to just snag that from the comments, download it, open it up, take a moment to take a look at it. And I want to give you a chance to look it over, do an up and down, and then we can begin to ask some questions. But, I want to take this just slowly, gently, mainly because I just brewed some coffee and I'd like to drink some of it. It's Cafe Bustelo. Does anyone drink that? Stuff is pretty good. It's Cuban. Anyway, so this is the study guide. Yeah, Oscar knows what's up. It's very good. Vacuum packed. You can literally say it takes place in a vacuum. This is one place where that is true. Alex says, where can we find it? I think you can find it everywhere. I'm only chuckling because it's actually super cheap. It's like $2 or $3 at Target, maybe a little more at any grocery store. Has this famous yellow label. Can't miss it. Cafe Bustelo. Cafe Bustelo. ¿Quieres café con leche? Sí. Oh, where can you find the study guide? Sorry. It's in the chat. Sorry. Who is on first base? Oh yeah, my wife. Yeah. Oh. No, for sure. It is so good. Anyone who knows me personally knows that I like my coffee. So yeah, among other things. Yeah, I'll send it again. It's possible that it's only available to those who were here when I sent it, which is one feature of Zoom that I really dislike. Oh, wait, sorry. I sent that to Oscar. Why do I always do that? Here, let me send it to everyone. My bad. Having a senior moment. Oh, so Jacqueline's asking, what do you mean about riot? Like, what should we focus on for that? So we just studied, what is a riot? Because part of the class unit on non-electoral political behavior focused on violent behavior, and riots were one concept that we considered. And so we defined, or we looked at riot, and we understood it mainly in relation to India and ethnic riots, and how minorities are often subject to ethnic violence in these riots. And we talked about how political fragmentation can affect their ability to protect themselves from riots and from violence. And so if we didn't define, I think that we may have defined riot, but if we didn't define it, just need to understand the context that we discussed it in, which is non-electoral political behavior, violent mass behavior, and in particular against ethnic minorities. And we talked a lot about India. So the exam will contain somewhere between 25 and 35 multiple choice or true false. Of that 35, or excuse me, of that 25 to 35, some sizable proportion will be drawn from the reading. The rest will be drawn from the lecture. All the content, since the midterm exam is fair game, that includes the reading and the lecture material and the videos. But you know me, I'm realistic, and I'm not going to burrow down for obscure details in the videos, but do expect all of that material to be drawn on in the creation of the exam. So you'll need to be prepared to respond in any of the different ways that we've discussed political behavior, either voters, parties, electoral or non-electoral. Angelise is asking, will the final be the same format as the midterm in terms of turning it in as a PDF, and are we expected to meet up the day of the final? So you're not expected to meet up. You don't have to do that. Format, in terms of turning it in, I'm going to ask that you turn it in as a Word document, and this instruction will be in the headline of the submission. And I'll make sure that this is in the exam as well, because it makes it easier for the TA and for us to communicate feedback with you or to grade it. So, but really, it's not a huge detail. Yes, I'll go over resource mobilization, but first, let me return and say that in addition to the 25 to 35 multiple choice or true false, we'll have somewhere between 4 and 5 short answer. On the midterm, we had 20 multiple choice true false and 3 short answer. So the final will be somewhat longer. It won't be twice as long, and it certainly won't be 3 times as long. We do have a 3-hour period for the final. You can take the full 3 hours if you want. I always did when I was in college. I know some students do, but it's not necessary. If you finish within an hour or whatever, go ahead and turn it in. You don't need to meet up on the day. Just make sure that you submit it by the due date. And it'll be available at the beginning of the exam period, but as always, I usually post it a few minutes early just so that you have it when the exam period starts and so that you can get all the time should you choose to use it. Brittany's asking is if I will be available again via Zoom if we have any questions or issues. I should, at the very, very least, the TA will, but I should be available unless, something comes up. But at this moment, I should be available. When I say something comes up, I mean, maybe an emergency or some extenuating circumstance. But at this moment, I should be available as before. Grace is asking if I can go over resource mobilization. So resource mobilization refers and relates to social movements. Resource mobilization theory is one theory or one perspective on social movements. Now, who can fill in the rest? What does resource mobilization say? Can anyone help Grace before I come back and fill in the rest? I'm positive there's somebody out there who can help. Anyone? What if I said an imaginary fairy will sprinkle dust on you in your sleep and extend your lifetime by 15 years if you take the plunge and exhibit the courage to discuss resource mobilization at this moment? Jacqueline says, securing resources for your organization. Yeah, that's part of it, certainly. What kinds of resources are we talking about? Ishan says, is this in relation to clientelistic linkage strategies where they have networks to give resources to votes? No, it is not. This refers to social movements. Social movements are separate from linkage strategies. Linkage strategies refer to parties and their behavior. Social movements fall under non-electoral voter or citizen behavior. So Jacqueline starts us off with securing resources for your organization. What kinds of resources, or what sorts of resources or factors can constitute these resources? So Virginia says money is one of them. Yeah, money is definitely one of them, right? Deep-pocketed social movements tend to do better because they can obviously use their resources. Chandon says resources such as labor, experience, skills, expertise in a certain field. So that sounds like individual experiences and resources, and social movements are made up of individuals, but we're talking about the organization as a whole, right? So the unit or the social movement as a thing. So besides money, what else makes a social movement well resourced, or makes a social movement liable to either succeed or form and become a robust political organization? What else besides money? So Oscar says gaining support from politicians to push policies that support their organization. Yeah, so political alliances or links to elites, that's definitely part of it as well. And then there's also the organizational component, which relates to the sort of centralized organization of some social movement. Social movements, by definition, are sort of dispersed civic action, but as organizations, they benefit from a centralized configuration where there's sort of a pyramidal design and you have a leadership structure and kind of a bureaucracy, or at least some structure that allows the organization or the movement to speak with one voice. That's the key. Remember that the nuclear power movement is unsuccessful because it's too dispersed. They don't have any centralized mechanism to speak their voice or to press politicians or to form those kinds of alliances that are also important, or to use the money that they have for that matter. But like the farm workers movement, by contrast, that turned into an eventual farm workers union in California and nationwide, was an example of a social movement that was successful because from the beginning, it had a centralized organizational form that lent itself to the eventual creation of a union. And so there's money, there's alliances and support from elites, or sympathy from elites. There's the organizational and the structural component, the centralized design that I just mentioned as well. And then there are other types of resources as well. You want to discuss or understand all of these. Grace says, can social media be a resource? So media, or access to media, is absolutely a resource. I don't know if social media, so social media may be a resource. If we're talking about the organization and the coordination of the movement, social media itself isn't really a resource. I mean, all social movements more or less have access to social media, right? There are, of course, authoritarian regimes that try to block out the internet or other forms of social media, but they can still often use encrypted forms like WhatsApp social movements to get around that. And so theoretically, all social movements have access, or at least the possibility of using social media. But what might be different about some social movements, for instance, could be their capacity to coordinate, or maybe some aspect of their use of media or their access to traditional media. I'm reaching here, but the point is that it needs to be something distinctive about the social movement that might make it more influential or might gain it access to a wider audience through politics or the media or through money or material resources. What other questions do you have? I hear someone out there in the ether with their mic unmuted, waiting in the wings to ask a question. Who goes there? I'm in sort of a strange mood today. So who is that? Got a question?
Professor, can you go over? Oh,
Oh, we got two. We got dueling mics. Was that Brittany?
Oh, no, it's me.
Oh, sorry, Virginia. My bad.
That's okay. I just kind of wanted to go over political fragmentation. Sort of kind of like, just like, because you know how you mentioned in the question right now, affect the ability of ethnic minorities to leverage their votes to secure protection from violence. And then I also kind of remembered what sort of we discussed in the past, but I'm sort of kind of blanking on it overall. So I kind of just wanted like a refresher on.
Yeah, Virginia, I think we can help you. The good news is I have 40 of my good friends and pals here to do it. So who can get us started? How does political fragmentation affect the ability of ethnic minorities to use their votes to secure protection from violence? Does anyone have any ideas?
So for this one, if there's more amount of effective parties, there's more of an ability for the minority groups to leverage their coalitions to get the security guarantees from those particular parties because they have a larger influence in the governing coalition. Conversely, if there's fewer, they can't do that because then you don't have to rely on those minorities to make the governing coalition.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key, right? It has everything to do with whether the government relies on the votes or the support of that ethnic minority. And so where political fragmentation is higher and there are more parties, any individual ethnic party becomes a potential kingmaker. And in that sense, the government relies or depends or turns on the support of that minority. And so that group can leverage their votes. They can say, all right, we'll give you our votes, but only under one condition. You protect us from violence. And that exchange takes place. And that's how the high level of political fragmentation can favor ethnic minorities. But if the level of political fragmentation is much lower and small parties don't play that potential kingmaker role and the government doesn't rely on the potential support of third parties because they get support from main large parties, of which there are usually two, well, in that case, the government does not need the support of the minority. And so that minority group is in no position to say, we will deny you our votes unless you protect us, because the government will just say, I don't need your votes. I don't need to protect you. And so just as often, that exchange effectively does take place where minorities are unable to secure protection from violence on political grounds. And so that's how political fragmentation affects the ability of minorities to secure protection from violence. Tessa, did you have a question or a comment? I saw your name pop up. Tessa? So where should we go from here?
So I just wanted to clarify something. So the Bolsa Familia program would be an example of a programmatic linkage, right?
Well, let me ask some of my friends, Ishan, and we can find out. What do the rest of you all think? Is the Bolsa Familia program in Brazil an example of a policy of a programmatic linkage strategy? Is that programmatic in its nature, the Bolsa Familia program? Check the chat. Someone's Brittany says, I thought it was a clientelistic strategy. Jacqueline says programmatic. Lewis says yes. Yes to what, Lewis? Programmatic?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it is programmatic. But Brittany, you're half correct, and here's why. Because remember that I used, actually, hold on. Let me be fair. It's not clientelistic, but I understand why you were under that impression. There's a good reason why you were, and let's be clear about the difference. So a programmatic linkage strategy revolves around using public policy to deliver benefits to whole constituencies. Really all people, not whole constituencies, everyone, right? Using public policy to improve people's lives. It's pretty simple, actually. It's amazing that we even have to call it a linkage strategy. That should be what governing actually is. But anyway, that's what a programmatic linkage strategy is, using public policy to deliver benefits to voters. A clientelistic linkage strategy involves using private goods in delivering those to within groups. That is, groups that reside within constituencies. And so you're targeting specific subgroups with what are effectively private goods because they're not public policy transfers, they're private transfers of money or other resources in exchange for their vote. And those groups are subgroups of larger groups. Bolsa Familia is an example of a programmatic linkage strategy because it's a public policy. It's a public policy that is set up to benefit everyone. And it is true that it primarily and principally benefits directly, at least, low-income families whose children previously went to school less frequently because they were often working for the family to generate more income. Bolsa Familia is a program where the government pays low-income families to send their children to school. The transfer is based on the school attendance of the child. And the objective is let's educate the children and let's help the families generate the income that the child was previously generating and working and not going to school. But that program is a public policy that's set up to benefit everyone who falls within the low income or the income category that is relevant for that policy. And it's Brazil, so it's still a developing country. It's a huge, huge proportion of people, but it benefits everyone in society because it's a public policy that helps to improve the quality of life and the standard of living of lower and working classes. It improves literacy and education rates. It helps to drive the acquisition of skills and human capital, and it helps to move society along and help to educate children and free families up from reliance on child labor. It's a public policy. Now, the PRI in Mexico, on the other hand, uses clientelistic strategies because they pay specific groups of voters to vote for them. They pay them or they give them beer or chicken or rice or marijuana or beer. These are all things that are exchanged. In Chile, the UDI, the Independent Democratic Union, it's a right-wing party with close links to the military, at least historically. It takes contributions from its powerful right-wing landed and capital elite interests, and then it uses that money and income to pay low income and working and peasant classes so that they can secure their support. It's classic clientelistic linkage strategy. Doesn't rely on public policy, relies on private goods, private transfers. So it's by definition, it's like a form of electoral corruption. But it's rampant, in Mexico under the PRI, and it exists throughout Latin America. It exists in the Philippines, Southeast Asia, and Asian countries. Developing countries in general struggle with clientelism. The clientelistic linkage strategy is the specific strategy that parties use when they use clientelism as a means of generating political support. But it's also a very vulnerable strategy because social changes and economic crises can undermine the ability of the party to deliver the goods. When your entire model revolves around private transfers, well, what happens when you don't have the money or the resources, which frequently happens in developing countries that are prone to crisis? And so there's a whole set of issues there that is quite destructive, and clientelism is, as a result, very important as a topic of study. If you're interested in that topic, I would consider studying it because it's very interesting and we just need to know more about it. But anyway, where should we go from here? Ishan, I think I may have some friends who can help you with that. Ishan's asking if we can go over the political process theory. Someone help Ishan to begin to better understand or refresh on this topic while I myself grab my notes. Ishan, are you asking about with regard to turnout or social movements?
I was asking in regard to social movements. I'll take either.
Well, let's start with one. Which one? We'll start with social movements. Just a moment. Just a second. Sorry. Oh yeah, okay. I remember why this was a little distant in my mind. This was actually a new theory for me. So the political process theory has to do with political opportunities. Here, let me actually share my screen. That's going to be a better idea. So this has everything to do with the opportunities or the openings that are created in politics or as a result of political changes. Sorry, I need to go in the other room. It's just ridiculous. This girl downstairs is just like super loud. So political process theory has everything to do with how opportunities or the lack thereof in the political process create openings or close them for social movements. So basically, if new groups arise and gain influence and help to amplify or create a space for the message of the social movement, that can constitute an opportunity. If the state is weakened as a result of an economic crisis or the loss of a war or something, or some sort of civil or domestic conflict, that can create space or an opportunity for a social movement to advance its cause. If there's a split in the regime, it can, of course, create opportunities as well, because it makes the entire regime vulnerable to transition. Transitions, by definition, are periods of change and periods that are rife with openings and all kinds of opportunities for intervention. By definition, transitions are critical junctures. That is, moments when the normal constraints on action are lifted. So actors like social movements or political entrepreneurs can take advantage of those openings and fill the void, so to speak, especially if the ruling faction or the regime has been weakened and is subject to internal splits. If there are new voters enfranchised as a result of, say, like the civil rights movement or the extension of the franchise to women or something, that can strengthen social movements that rely on the support of those groups. And then elite support for the opposition. This is one factor that is in common with the resource mobilization theory. If there's support for the social movement among political elites, it dramatically improves the prospects for success, because that is a way to effectively enter politics and exert influence. And even if it's effective or de facto, it is an enormous improvement over the alternative, which is isolation and a lack of access to the corridors of power. And so this is the political process theory, and it has to do with the spaces or the opportunities created in the political process or in politics. And the idea is that social movements need to be cognizant and aware of these moments and these opportunities, and they need to respond swiftly and be vigil, so to speak, and respond in a meaningful way so that they don't miss the opportunity and so that the window doesn't close.
So is this similar to the path dependence theory in the sense of, as you were referring to, like these political opportunities are similar to the critical junctures in that theory? I'm just trying to
Yeah, pretty much,
understand
but
it.
this theory
Okay.
doesn't involve the concept of path dependence.
Yeah. Okay, so it's like the first part, like the critical junctures portion of the path dependence theory.
Yeah, these are kind of, what I would say is the effect of these things is essentially the same as the effect or the potential effect of a critical juncture, because they all have the effect of potentially lifting some of the normal constraints on action, that at least theoretically. I think that's the idea. This is a theory from sociology. That's why for some of you, in my opinion, it's a little wonky. That's just my personal opinion. I think that some of the conceptualization is a little fuzzy. I put this in language that makes sense for us as political scientists. Now, some of you may be sociologists, and I apologize, but the way that they formulate and conceptualize this in the actual theory is very different, and it's just too loose in my opinion. But what they really mean, and I know I'm being really patronizing, but what they really mean in my opinion is they mean these kinds of things. They do call it political process theory, but the language they use is different. This is more political science language right here. Parties, the state, the ruling faction, enfranchisement of voters, elites and masses, etc. Is anyone here from sociology? If so, I apologize. Actually, funny story. So when I was an undergraduate, so I began as an English major, but I switched to political science on the first day because I had a comparative politics class. And then when I was graduating, in the year leading up, I was thinking seriously about grad school, obviously. And originally I was going to go to law school, but then I started switching and I pivoted and decided to apply to graduate school. And at first I was considering sociology. And one of the professors in the department at my university was, he just like accosted me. He was like, I swear, if you go and you study sociology, you pansy. And he was from Boston, so he had this like thick Boston accent. You pansy. But anyway, I didn't study sociology. I went and studied political science. But sociology focuses, of course, on social groups and society and relationships in society. Political science and sociology have a great deal in common, but obviously in political science, we're more focused on power and institutions as instruments of power and concentrations of power. And so we're a little bit more focused on, you know, the smoky room aspect, and a little bit less focused on the parent tunnel, so to speak. What other questions do you have? Oh wow, I totally missed some of the contributions to the chat. Sorry, but it looks like you guys did a fabulous job discussing these, and you totally did. So yeah, good for you. Yeah, Kevin, definitely the Peter Griffin voice. I want to go watch some Family Guy now. I think I'll have to do that. Kevin, thank you, Kevin. Jacqueline says, how much do we need to write for the questions? You know, so my view on this is anywhere between 3 and 5 sentences is adequate. Some of you reported some difficulty doing that, and I empathize with you. But what I want to stress is that there's a real value placed here on, you know, putting it in your own words and putting it succinctly and concisely. And so try to keep it concise and keep it short and sweet and cozy, and put a button on it, maybe 3 to 5 sentences. But as always, it's acceptable if it's a little bit longer. I think anything shorter may be problematic because you probably need at least 3, but you get it. We've got a few minutes left. So where do we go from here?
So I know one of the factors of politicians supporting public opinion versus market factors would be open versus closed democracy. And then another would be the electoral law. It's question 7. What are some other factors that would be there besides those two?
Yeah, well, I would like you to focus mainly on those, frankly, because that's kind of what we learned about in the article that we read. And so you don't need to go into a great deal of additional detail specifying conditions, because it really has a lot to do with the openness to the international economy. And when countries are open to the international economy, it means that the performance of foreign actors' interests becomes a factor, and it can affect the survival of the government. And so governments are more responsive often to market actors and foreign interests as well than they are to public opinion when the economy is highly integrated with the global economy. But on the other hand, if the economy is closed off, the performance of the domestic economy does not depend on the performance of the assets or the interests of foreign actors or foreign multinationals. And so oftentimes, because the domestic economy is more or less shielded from the global economy, public opinion is more of a factor in decision making, and the government is more responsive to public opinion. Now, of course, those are two ideal states of the world, and there's a lot of space in between, and there are exceptions. But for example, countries like Norway or Chile is a country, it's notorious for high levels of popular dissatisfaction with government because of the perception, and rightly so, that they don't respond to popular opinion or popular needs, that they mainly respond to business interests, and especially if not, partly or mainly to foreign interests that are highly invested in the domestic economy, which is very much integrated in the global economy. And it's true that the political parties and the governments in Chile, at least historically, until a couple of years ago, when there was a huge social uprising because people were so outraged at the just the total disregard for decades, that anyway, for a long time, this was the norm. And more generally, exposure to the international economy will affect the responsiveness of the government to public opinion. Listen, everybody, we're out of time. And this is where I have to tell you that it's just been a fantastic semester. And, unfortunately, I'm not able to return to UC Merced. They wanted me to return and asked me to, but because my wife and I are expecting our first child, we have decided to stay here, and I'm actually pursuing work in secondary education, and I may become a high school teacher, and I may actually be a high school teacher at an all girls school that I had an extended interview at the other day. So I loved my time at UC Merced, and you've all been wonderful, and I feel like we've really connected despite the distance. And so I just have only, love and affection and support for you. And I hope that everything, goes well, and that you continue to study politics. These questions mean as much to me as they do to you. And so we learn a lot from each other, and this won't be the end. I'll always support you. But this is, the conclusion for me at UC Merced. But it was such a great experience, and this class in particular was just excellent. So thank you for being a part of it and for being there with me. And we actually shared a lot of experiences together. It's interesting to know because a lot happened this semester, and I shared and I divulged much more than I typically do. And so it's been a real pleasure for me to get to know many of you and to share this. So I just want to thank you again, and I know that you'll do really well, and I support you. And I just want to just reiterate that, and this is the end. So as always, and as I said before, I'll post the review guide, and the procedure for the final will be as it is. And I just hope that you'll prepare, and that you will be confident and courageous as you finish your semester. And congratulations to those of you who are graduating. But this is not the end. I will see you in some way, in some form, and just reach out if you need support. And good luck. But thank you, everybody, and that is it.